Logistics, the behind-the-scenes world that makes the entire art world tick.
It's a side of art that I think a lot of people, even artists, don't really think about.
And today, we're going to see how it affects artists and collectors specifically,
That's right.
from sourcing materials to the mind-boggling task of transporting large-scale installations. We've got a lot to cover.
Yeah, we do.
So to get started, we've got a stack of sources here giving us an inside look at how things work for some big names, AI Weiwei, Damien Hirst. We'll also be peeking behind the curtain of major events like the Venice Biennale and institutions like the Tate and the Smithsonian.
Oh, wow.
It's really about uncovering all the hidden steps that go into bringing art to the public.
And it's interesting because logistics, it's not just about moving things around.
Right.
It impacts so many other things, an artist's creative choices, how we as viewers experience an exhibition, and even, the value of a collector's pieces.
Totally. You can't separate the art from the logistics. So I think a good place to begin is where an artwork begins, in the artist's studio.
Yeah.
Even before a piece reaches a gallery or a collector, there are these logistical challenges that can really make or break the creative process.
Absolutely. Material sourcing, for example. It's not as simple as just, running to the art supply store. Artists today are working with all kinds of materials, porcelain, digital tech, and often those materials need to come from very specific places.
Exactly. And like Ai Weiwei, I know he often works with porcelain and wood.
Yes.
That's sourced directly from specific regions in China that are known for their particular kind of craftsmanship. So it's like this whole extra layer of complexity.
Yeah.
You have to navigate suppliers, shipping routes, cultural differences even, and it's all part of the artist's process.
Precisely. And it really brings up this question of globalization and how it's impacting artists. On one hand, globalization opens up all these possibilities in terms of accessing materials, but then on the other hand, it creates this really delicate balancing act between an artist's vision and, the realities of sourcing those materials, shipping costs, and just the whole logistical side of things.
Yeah, because it's not just about finding the perfect material. It's about being able to get it reliably.
Exactly.
And knowing that the cost isn't going to suddenly skyrocket and throw off your entire budget. Because that could impact the final artwork as well.
It definitely can.
And then even once the artwork is complete, you still have to move it.
Yeah.
And this is where things get really interesting, especially with like those huge installations that Damien Hirst is known for. Have you ever seen those in person?
I have. Yeah, they're incredible.
They're massive, intricate arrangements, often fragile objects. It's like moving a small museum.
It is. And that's a great analogy because transporting art, especially pieces that are large or really delicate, it requires a very specific set of skills and a level of planning that's, intense.
Yeah.
You need to control the climate to prevent damage. You need security measures to prevent theft, and you need to really understand risk management because things can happen.
Right. So it's not just about getting it from point A to point B. It's about making sure that it arrives in the exact same condition that it left the studio in.
Absolutely.
And what if something does happen in transit? What then?
That's where insurance comes in. But we can talk about that more later.
Okay. But I mean, even just thinking about the cost of transportation for an artist, that's a huge consideration.
It is. It can be a major factor in their budget, for sure, especially for artists who are creating those larger scale works.
Absolutely. And for collectors, the cost and complexity of shipping a piece, that's something you have to think about before you even buy it.
Absolutely.
Especially if it's coming from overseas.
Yes, definitely.
And that's where art logistics companies come in. These are the experts who handle everything: packing, shipping, customs, paperwork, even the installation at the final destination.
They're essential, really, for both artists and collectors. For artists who need to get their work out there and collectors who want to protect their investments.
Yeah.
It's a whole network of people working behind the scenes.
They're like the unseen stagehands in this whole art world production.
Yeah, exactly. Making sure everything runs smoothly behind the scenes.
So we've got the artwork out of the studio. It's on its way. But the logistical journey, it doesn't end there, does it?
It doesn't. Next comes the whole realm of exhibition logistics.
Right.
Where presentation is everything. The way a piece of art is displayed, it can totally change how people experience it.
Totally.
Which, in turn, can impact the value of the piece.
That makes sense. I mean, museums like MoMA, they're known for their incredible exhibitions.
Right.
What makes them so good at it?
Well, it's a combination of things, but space management is definitely key. They really think about the layout of the gallery, the lighting, how do they make sure that the lighting highlights all those details in the artwork, and then the flow, how people move through the space. It's like choreographing a dance between the art and the audience.
That's a good way to put it, yeah.
Yeah.
So it's not just about like hanging a painting on a wall. There's this whole art to the presentation, and that involves logistics too.
Absolutely. Installation can involve complex scaffolding, mounting techniques, and then there's coordinating with technicians if it's a multimedia installation. And then you've got to make sure everything's coordinated between the artist, the gallery, and whoever's hosting the exhibition.
I bet.
It's a lot of moving parts.
I can only imagine how complicated things can get, especially with those big events like the Venice Biennale, where you have so many artists, national pavilions, all trying to set up their work at the same time.
Oh, yeah. The Biennale is a whole logistical ballet happening on this massive scale.
Yep.
You've got artwork coming in from all over the world, and each piece, each installation, has its own requirements for how it needs to be displayed.
And the timelines have to be perfect, or else it's just chaos.
Exactly. It's all about synchronization. And this is where the role of the galleries comes in, because they often act as these intermediaries between the artists and the curators, managing communications, making sure everyone's on schedule and that the whole thing runs smoothly.
So for an artist, having a good relationship with their gallery is essential, and not just for, selling the work,
Right.
but for navigating the logistics of actually exhibiting it.
Absolutely. A good gallery will really understand the artist's vision for a piece.
Okay.
And they'll advocate for them during that installation process, making sure that the final presentation is exactly what the artist intended.
And for collectors, events like the Biennale, or even just visiting a gallery, it's a chance to see how presentation affects their perception of the art.
It is. It really adds another dimension.
Because it's not just about the art itself.
Right.
It's about how it's shown, the context that it's in.
Right. The way it's lit, the space it occupies, even the other works that it's displayed next to can change how you see it. It all feeds into how we experience art and how much we value it.
And speaking of value, let's turn our attention to the art marketplace itself.
Oh.
Art fairs, auctions, those kinds of things.
Right.
And those are two very different beasts, but they both come with their own set of logistical challenges, both for artists and collectors.
Absolutely. Let's start with art fairs. They're kind of like these global pop-up events where galleries come from all over the world to showcase their artists and connect with collectors.
And probably the most well-known example of that is Art Basel, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely. It's like the Olympics of the art world, really.
I've heard it's a whirlwind of activity.
It is, very much so. For galleries participating in Art Basel, it's a massive logistical undertaking. They have to transport all these artworks, sometimes really valuable pieces, across international borders.
Right.
And often with these really tight deadlines.
Yeah. Just thinking about navigating customs regulations, that alone sounds like a nightmare.
It can be, because every country has its own set of rules. Tons of paperwork. And any mistakes can cause big delays or even financial penalties. And then, on top of all that, they have to set up their booth, design an attractive space, make sure they've got staff, people who really know the art. And then they've got to figure out their marketing, how they're going to attract buyers.
It sounds stressful.
It is. But for artists, having your work at Art Basel, it's huge. It's this incredible opportunity for exposure. But it also means putting a lot of trust in your gallery. They're going to handle all those logistics and that they're going to represent your work well.
So that communication, that trust between an artist and their gallery, that's essential.
It is. An artist needs to know that their gallery will take care of their work. Make sure it's presented in the best possible light.
And for collectors, art fairs like Art Basel, that's like this amazing opportunity to see a ton of art from all over the world, all in one place.
It is. But it's important to do your homework before you go. Figure out which galleries and artists you want to see and be prepared for a fast-paced environment. It can get competitive.
It sounds overwhelming but exciting.
It is both of those things. And auctions, they're a different beast altogether. They're these high-stakes events where people are competing to buy some of the most sought-after artworks in the world.
I always think of Sotheby's when I think about auctions.
Yeah, they're a good example.
Seeing those news reports of people bidding millions for a single painting, it's wild.
It is. And they handle every part of that process, starting with the consignment, which involves, first of all, authenticating the artwork. making sure that it's actually real,
All
and
right.
then having experts come in and appraise its value.
Yeah, that authentication process, that's got to be so important,
Yeah.
especially for collectors who want to be sure they're not getting ripped off.
Absolutely. Sotheby's has a whole team of specialists, and they use all sorts of techniques to verify the authenticity of a piece. They'll examine the brushstrokes. They do scientific analysis, looking at the pigments, the materials used. It's like detective work for the art world.
It is.
And then, once a piece has been authenticated, they photograph it, really carefully. They put it in their catalog.
Right.
And then the whole marketing machine gets going. Beautiful catalogs, previews, exhibitions, all designed to build excitement and attract those bidders.
And then comes the main event, the auction itself.
Yeah.
It must be such an adrenaline rush to be in that room, with the paddles going up, the price going higher and higher.
It's definitely exciting, and sometimes things can happen that you don't expect. Remember that Banksy incident at Sotheby's a few years ago?
Oh, yeah. When that painting, Girl with Balloon, shredded itself right after it sold. That was insane.
It was. That was a perfect example of how unpredictable the art world can be. And for collectors, it was a big reminder to read the fine print.
Really?
Understand what happens if a piece gets damaged or if something totally unexpected happens, because there's always a risk involved.
Right. So we've talked about getting art out of the studio, getting it transported,
Right.
exhibiting it, selling it, all that stuff.
Mhm.
But what about when it's not on display?
Right. That's when we get into the world of art storage and organization.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Because what good is a piece of art if it deteriorates because it wasn't stored properly?
Exactly. This is about preserving artworks for future generations.
Yeah.
And institutions like the Tate in London, they've got these incredible storage facilities.
Oh, wow.
They're like climate-controlled vaults, designed to protect all these priceless works from, time, basically.
So they've really thought of everything in terms of designing these spaces.
Oh, yeah. Temperature, humidity, those have to be controlled perfectly because any fluctuations can damage artwork, especially paintings and textiles. And then the lighting. It's really carefully managed to prevent fading.
Wow.
And of course, top-notch security to prevent theft, pest control, fire suppression. I mean, they've thought of everything.
They're really trying to create the perfect environment to keep these pieces safe.
They are. They really are. But it's not just about protecting the physical artwork. When you're dealing with a big collection of art spanning centuries, organization is just as important.
Right.
It's like having a giant library, but instead of books, it's priceless artworks. The Smithsonian, for instance, they have this massive art collection, and they manage it so well.
Yeah.
They've got this really comprehensive inventory system, and they document every single detail about each piece.
So, what kind of information are we talking about here?
Everything. The artwork's provenance, which means its history of ownership, condition reports to track any damage or restoration work, exhibition history, so, where and when it's been displayed before. They even have high-res images of everything.
It sounds like a dream for any art historian.
It is. And the best part is a lot of this information is online now. So researchers, anyone who's interested can access it. And that level of transparency, it's really important for the art market as a whole.
Right.
It helps to build trust, and it helps to ensure that the art being traded is authentic.
So for collectors, that's invaluable. To be able to research a potential purchase.
Absolutely. To understand the history, the condition, to really make sure that what they're investing in is the real deal.
I imagine, though, there have to be some challenges with managing these huge collections, right? Especially when it comes to things like space and resources.
Oh, absolutely. Space is a big issue, especially for smaller galleries. Even a place like the New Museum in New York, they've got an amazing collection, but they're in New York City. Space is limited and expensive, so it's a constant challenge.
And finding affordable storage in a city like New York, that must be impossible.
It's definitely not easy. It forces institutions to make some tough decisions, like which pieces to keep on display and which ones to put in storage.
Wow. So even what the public gets to see is affected by these logistical considerations.
It is, yeah. And then there's the cost factor. Specialized art storage facilities, especially the ones with climate control, top-notch security, those aren't cheap. So you have to factor in the cost of the space, insurance, staff. It all adds up.
So it's a cost that most people don't even think about
Right.
when they're looking at a piece of art in a gallery.
Right, exactly. But it's a crucial part of the equation. But museums and galleries are coming up with some really innovative solutions to these challenges. A lot of institutions are turning to modular storage systems.
Okay.
They're super flexible. You can customize the layout to fit the artwork.
Okay.
The Denver Art Museum, they've had a lot of success with that.
So the much more efficient way to use the space that they have.
It is, yeah. And technology is playing a big role, too. Things like RFID tagging and barcoding. It's basically like giving each artwork its own little digital fingerprint.
Right.
Each tag has all this information about the artwork that can be accessed really easily just by scanning it.
So it makes it easier to keep track of everything in the collection.
Exactly. And it can also help with security because if something gets moved without authorization, it'll trigger an alert.
So it's like this extra layer of protection.
It is, yeah. And all these things, the sustainability concerns, the technology, it all points to this bigger conversation about the future of art logistics and how it's being shaped by these global trends.
Right. Let's talk about security, for instance, because art theft, that's a constant threat,
It is.
especially with those really high-profile pieces. I always think about the theft of Edvard Munch's The Scream. It's scary to think about how vulnerable these artworks can be.
It is, and it's something that everyone in the art world has to be aware of. Logistics providers are constantly working to improve their security measures, trying to stay one step ahead of potential threats.
So what are they doing to prevent art theft?
It's multi-layered. They've got specialized art handlers who are trained in how to move and handle valuable pieces really carefully. Transportation often involves secure trucks with GPS tracking, sometimes even armored vehicles, depending on the value of the artwork. And of course, the storage facilities are really secure, alarm systems, cameras, multiple layers of access control.
Like a whole high-tech operation.
It is. Security is a top priority.
But it's necessary when you're dealing with these priceless cultural treasures.
Ah,
And speaking of, think about the environment, sustainability, that's a big conversation happening everywhere,
it is. Yeah.
including the art world.
Yeah.
Because the art world, it relies on shipping things all over the world, using all kinds of materials. So it does have a significant environmental impact.
It does. And there's a growing movement towards adopting eco-friendly practices, across the board. Galleries and artists are thinking more about sourcing materials locally whenever they can, reducing packaging waste, and even choosing greener shipping methods.
I know there are some artists who are really passionate about this, like Olafur Eliasson. I know he uses recycled materials in his work, and he really pushes for sustainability in his studio.
He's a great example. And institutions are getting on board too, switching to more energy-efficient lighting,
Okay.
things like that.
Yeah, using renewable energy.
Exactly.
That's great to hear.
It's not an afterthought anymore. It's becoming part of how art is created, transported, and presented.
Right. So it's about recognizing that the art world has an impact on the environment and then taking steps to lessen that impact.
Exactly. And this leads us to technology. Because technology, it's changing the game in a big way. Think about online platforms.
Yeah.
I mean, they've exploded in popularity. It's easier than ever to buy and sell art online from anywhere.
It's true.
Platforms like Artsy have completely changed the landscape. They've created this global marketplace.
Right.
Collectors can browse art, buy art from all over the world without ever leaving their homes.
It's amazing. It's like having an art gallery right there in your pocket.
It is. And for artists, it's incredible because it helps them reach a wider audience. They don't have to rely solely on the traditional gallery system.
And which can be, difficult to get into.
It can, yeah.
So this really levels the playing field a little bit.
It does, yeah. And for collectors, it gives them access to a much wider selection of art.
And often at more affordable prices than you'd find in a traditional gallery.
Exactly. It's really democratizing the art world in a way that we haven't seen before. And these platforms are getting more sophisticated.
Right.
They're adding virtual exhibitions, augmented reality features. You can even see what a piece would look like in your home before you buy it.
That's cool.
And then there's blockchain.
Yeah, blockchain, I've heard a lot about that lately,
Yeah.
especially in terms of art authentication.
Blockchain has the potential to really change things. It's the secure, immutable ledger, which basically means that once information is recorded on it, it can't be changed. And it can be used to track the ownership history of an artwork, from the moment it's created all the way to its current owner.
It's like giving an artwork its own digital fingerprint.
Exactly. And that's what makes it so valuable for authentication. Because every time an artwork is sold, every time it changes hands, That transaction is recorded on the blockchain. And that creates this permanent tamper-proof record that can be traced all the way back to the artist.
So there's no more doubt about whether a piece is authentic or not.
Exactly. And it's not just about authenticity. Blockchain can be used to track the condition of an artwork over time,
Okay.
any conservation work that's been done.
So collectors can really get a full picture of the artwork's history.
They can. It adds a level of transparency to the market that is really valuable. It builds trust, it makes the buying and selling process more efficient, and it helps to combat art forgery, which has been a problem in the art world, well, forever.
Because you hear those stories of forgeries being sold for millions of dollars.
Exactly.
Because the buyer thought they were getting the real deal. And it turns out it was a fake.
And blockchain has the potential to prevent that. And there are already platforms out there like VeriSart that are using blockchain to create these digital certificates of authenticity.
So it's like a digital passport.
It is, yeah. It's like a digital passport for the artwork. And speaking of passports, we should talk about one of the biggest headaches for anyone buying or selling art internationally.
Oh, yeah.
Customs.
Customs. It's the hurdle that everyone has to clear.
It is, and it can be really tricky.
Yeah. What are some of the things that artists and collectors need to keep in mind when they're shipping art across international borders?
Well, first of all, every country has its own set of rules. Import regulations, export regulations, and they can change, and they do change all the time. So it's really important to stay updated, to do your research, and to make sure you've got all the right paperwork before you ship anything.
That sounds complicated.
It can be, especially when you're dealing with high-value pieces, historical artifacts, things like that, because then you might need special permits or licenses, and the insurance costs go up.
Right.
And then there are cultural heritage laws to consider.
What are those?
Well, they're designed to protect a country's artistic and historical treasures. So you can't just ship a priceless artifact out of a country without going through the proper channels. It's about protecting their heritage.
So there's this whole extra layer of complexity.
There is, and it's important to work with professionals. Art logistics companies, they know the ins and outs of all these regulations, and they can help to make sure that everything is done legally and safely. It can save you a lot of headaches.
Because I imagine if you mess up with customs, it could be a very costly mistake.
It could, definitely. So it's worth it to get expert help.
And for artists who want to exhibit their work internationally, that's even more important.
It is,
Right.
because they need someone to handle all the details. The paperwork, packing, shipping, someone who knows how to get the artwork to its destination safely and legally.
Right, because you don't want your masterpiece getting stuck in customs.
Exactly. Or worse, damaged in transit because it wasn't packed properly. That's where those specialized art handling skills really come in. They know how to protect even the most fragile pieces.
So basically, if you're involved in the international art market, whether you're an artist or a collector, working with an art logistics company is pretty much essential.
It is. They have the expertise, the connections, the knowledge to navigate all of these complexities.
And that peace of mind is probably priceless.
It is. It takes the stress out of the process and allows you to focus on what really matters, the art itself.
And speaking of stress, let's talk about one thing that I'm sure stresses out both artists and collectors alike.
What's that?
Insurance.
Ah, yes, insurance. A necessary evil, some might say, but it's incredibly important in the art world.
Yeah, but I'm guessing it's not as simple as just calling up your regular insurance agent and getting a policy.
It's not. Art insurance is its own specialized field. Because you're not insuring a car or a house. You're insuring a piece of art that has its own unique characteristics and value. And there are so many factors to consider.
Like what?
Well, obviously the value of the piece,
Right.
how fragile it is, its historical significance, even the security of the place where it's being stored or exhibited. All of these things play into how much it will cost to insure.
So you can't just slap a price tag on a painting and expect to get a standard insurance policy.
Exactly. It's much more nuanced than that. Art insurance appraisers, they're like detectives.
Okay.
They'll examine a piece from every angle to figure out its risk profile.
So they're not just looking at the art itself, they're looking at the context that it's in as well.
They are. They look at the materials used, the artist's reputation, even things like light, humidity, temperature fluctuations. All these things can damage a piece of art, and they need to factor that into the equation.
So it sounds like they need to have both art historical knowledge and scientific expertise.
They do.
Yeah.
And they also have to stay up to date on trends in the art market because prices can fluctuate. An artist can suddenly become really hot and the value of their work goes up, and that means the insurance value goes up too.
Right.
So it's not a one-time thing. You have to constantly reevaluate your coverage.
It's an ongoing process.
It is, yeah. And there are different types of insurance to consider. For example, there's what's called wall-to-wall coverage,
Okay.
which protects an artwork from the moment it leaves the artist's studio until it gets to its final destination. So if you're an artist and you're shipping a piece to a gallery, this covers it the whole way.
Okay. So if it gets damaged during shipping or installation, you're covered.
You are, yeah. Then there's in-transit coverage, which specifically protects the artwork while it's being transported. So if you're shipping something internationally, that's a good one to have.
So for collectors, it's important to make sure that any piece they buy, especially if it's coming from overseas, has that in-transit coverage.
It is, yeah, because you want to protect your investment. And then there's exhibition insurance,
Okay.
which is crucial for any gallery, museum, or art fair. It covers the artworks while they're on display, protecting against things like damage, theft, even what they call mysterious disappearance.
Oh, wow. That's a thing.
It is. Sadly, sometimes artworks just vanish.
Right.
No one knows where they've gone.
So insurance helps to mitigate that risk.
It does, yeah, because you can do everything you can to prevent theft, but you can't control everything.
You can't, yeah.
And if something does happen, you need to be protected financially.
So it's like any other valuable asset.
Exactly. You wouldn't drive your car without insurance. You shouldn't buy or exhibit valuable art without it either.
Right. It's about managing that risk and protecting your investment.
Yeah.
Now, we've talked a lot about the technical side of art logistics, but what about the people involved?
Yeah, the human element. Because it is a people business, even though we're talking about moving objects.
Right. So we've mentioned art handlers and appraisers, but who else is working behind the scenes to keep this whole system running?
Well, one of the key players is the art registrar. Think of them as the librarians of the art world.
Oh, yeah.
They manage all the documentation, keep everything organized, track the location of every piece. They're the ones who make sure that all the paperwork is in order.
So they're like the guardians of the collection.
They are, yeah. And they need to be incredibly detail-oriented, organized, and great communicators. They have to be able to manage multiple projects at once. And of course, they need to have a deep understanding of art handling best practices, museum ethics.
Sounds like a demanding job.
It can be, but it's also really rewarding, especially if you love art. Then there are the art preparators.
Yep.
They're the skilled technicians who handle the actual packing, crating, and installation of artworks. So they're the ones who build the crates, mount the sculptures, make sure everything is secure.
So they need a blend of artistic sensibility and technical know-how.
They do, because it's not just about moving heavy things around. It's about understanding the art, being able to interpret what the artist intended, and then figuring out how to install the work in a way that preserves that intention and that preserves its impact. And they have to be really resourceful because they work with all kinds of materials, all kinds of mounting techniques. And sometimes they have to think on their feet and improvise.
It's a job that requires a lot of creativity, too.
It does, yeah. They're like problem solvers.
Yeah.
And their work is so important, even though most people never even see it, because they're the ones who make sure that the art is presented in the best possible way. And then we have the art couriers. They're the ones who travel with the artwork.
Oh, right, like the art world's bodyguards.
Exactly. They accompany the artwork, make sure it's never left unattended, and that it's handled with care the whole way.
I bet that's a high-pressure job.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
Especially when you're responsible for a really valuable masterpiece.
Right.
They usually travel by plane or by those specialized art transport trucks, and they have to be ready for anything. Flight delays, bad weather, you name it.
It sounds like you need a really specific personality to do that job.
You do, yeah. Nerves of steel, for sure. And a deep understanding of art handling procedures and security protocols. Plus, you have to be discreet and professional because you're often working with high-profile clients and valuable pieces that attract a lot of attention.
Right. It's like a secret world.
It is, but it's a really important one because these are the people who make sure that the art gets to its destination safely and securely. And it's amazing to think about all the different people who are involved in this whole process, right?
It is. It takes a village to move a masterpiece, or to create one, for that matter. It makes you realize how interconnected everything is in the art world.
It does, yeah. It's a really collaborative effort.
Right.
And it's a field that's constantly changing, new technologies, new trends. And of course, the global demand for art is always growing.
Speaking of new trends,
Yeah.
I'm curious to hear your thoughts on what's on the horizon for art logistics?
Sure.
We've touched on sustainability, the rise of online platforms,
Hmm.
but what else do you see shaping the future of this field?
Well, one trend that I'm really interested in is this increasing focus on transparency
Oh.
and ethical practices throughout the art supply chain.
Mhm.
Consumers are becoming more and more aware of the impact of their purchases, the environmental impact, the
Yeah.
social impact, and that extends to the art world as well.
Right. So people want to know where the materials in their artwork came from, how the artists were treated,
Right.
whether the shipping and storage processes were sustainable, all of that.
Exactly. And this is putting pressure on galleries, artists, logistics companies to be more transparent.
Okay.
And we're seeing things like fair trade art, which ensures that artists are paid fairly and that they're working in safe conditions. And there are more carbon neutral shipping options available now.
Yep.
It's about recognizing that there's an ethical dimension to art logistics. It's not just about getting the art from one place to another.
It's about doing it the right way.
It is. And technology is helping to facilitate this shift.
Mm-hmm.
We talked about blockchain earlier.
Right.
Well, blockchain can be used to track the provenance of materials, where they came from, how they were produced, so you can make sure that everything was sourced ethically and sustainably.
So it's like that transparency extends to the entire supply chain, not just the artwork itself.
Exactly. And another trend that I think is really interesting is the use of AI, artificial intelligence,
Okay.
in art logistics.
I'm intrigued. How does that work?
Well, AI can be used to do things like optimize shipping routes,
Okay.
automate customs paperwork, and it can even help with things like appraisal and authentication.
So it's all about streamlining the process
It is, making things more efficient, more accurate.
and saving money, I imagine.
Exactly. And as AI technology continues to advance, we're going to see even more applications in the art world.
That's exciting to think about. So it's like technology is changing the game for art logistics, just like it's changing everything else.
It is, but it's important to remember that technology is a tool. It's not a replacement for human expertise.
Right.
As technology automates certain tasks, it actually frees up art logistics professionals to focus on the things that require human creativity, problem solving, a deep understanding of the art world.
So it's about that collaboration between technology and human skill.
Exactly. And I think that collaboration is what's going to lead to the most exciting innovations in the years to come.
This has been a really fascinating conversation. We've covered so much ground,
We have.
from the challenges of sourcing materials to the rise of sustainable practices, the potential of blockchain and AI. It's clear that art logistics is a really complex field.
It is.
But before we wrap up, I'd love to hear your thoughts on how all of these trends are shaping the art world as a whole.
Well, I think one of the most significant impacts is that it's making the art world more accessible to a wider audience. Online platforms are breaking down geographical barriers, connecting artists and collectors from all over the world. And technology is making it easier than ever to learn about art, to buy art, to sell art.
And that's opening up opportunities for emerging artists, especially artists from underrepresented communities.
Absolutely. It's giving them a platform to share their work with a global audience.
Which is incredible.
It is. And we're also seeing this reflected in the types of art that are being collected and exhibited now. There's a growing appreciation for art from non-Western cultures, indigenous art, folk art forms that haven't always gotten the attention they deserve.
So it's expanding our understanding of what art is
It is.
and where it comes from.
Exactly. And art logistics is a big part of that
Okay.
because it's making it easier for artists from all over the world to create, to share, and to transport their work.
So it's like art logistics is helping to create a more inclusive art world.
I think it is. Because art has this amazing power to connect people,
Yeah.
to help us understand each other. And art logistics, it's playing a crucial role in making sure those connections can happen.
I love that. It's a reminder that there's so much more to the art world than what we see on the surface.
Definitely.
There's this whole intricate network of people and processes working behind the scenes
Yeah.
to bring art to life.
Yes, a beautiful thing.
And as the art world continues to evolve, it's exciting to think about how art logistics will evolve along with it.
It is, yeah.
So as we wrap up our deep dive into this fascinating world, what's one thing you'd like our listeners to take away from this conversation?
I hope they'll remember that art logistics is more than just moving things around.
Right.
It's about supporting artists. It's about preserving cultural heritage, and it's about making sure that art is accessible to everyone. It's a really important part of the art world, and it plays a big role in shaping how we experience and value art.
I love that, because behind every artwork, there's this whole story,
There is.
this whole journey that it's been on. And art logistics is a big part of that story.
It is.
So thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive.
It's been a pleasure.
It's been really enlightening. And I hope our listeners have gained a new appreciation for all the work that goes on behind the scenes to bring art into our lives.
I hope so too. It's a fascinating field, and there's always more to learn.
Absolutely. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep appreciating the art that's all around you.
Yeah, it's like a whole hidden world that most of us just don't even know exists.
It is.
And it makes you realize that the art world is so much bigger
Yeah.
than just the art itself.
It is. It's a whole ecosystem.
There's this whole network of people and processes and logistics
Right.
that's all working together to make it happen.
Right. To bring that art to life,
To
basically.
bring it to life. And as the art world changes and evolves, it's really interesting to think about how art logistics is going to have to evolve along with it.
Yeah, it will. It has to. So as we wrap up our deep dive, what's one key takeaway you hope our listeners will remember about art logistics?
Well, I hope they'll remember that it's more than just moving things around. You know, it's about supporting artists, it's about preserving our cultural heritage, and it's about making sure that art is accessible to everyone. It's a really essential part of the art world, and it plays a really important role in shaping how we experience and value art.
That's a beautiful way to put it. It's like behind every artwork, there's this whole story, this whole journey that it's been on.
Right.
And art logistics is a big part of that story.
It really is.
So thank you so much for joining us for this deep dive into the world of art logistics.
My pleasure. It's been great talking to you.
It's been so enlightening, and I hope our listeners have gained a new appreciation for all the work that goes on behind the scenes to bring art into our lives.
Yeah, I hope so too. It's such a fascinating field, and there's so much more to learn, I think, for everybody.
Absolutely. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep appreciating